Hello, and welcome to our August 2020 edition of Staying Global While Staying Home. I'm Lucy Newcomb, the CEO of the NewComm Global Group and host of the program. It's my great pleasure today to have Yuka Nakasone here with us. Yuka is very kindly being with us 9 hours ahead on a Friday evening in her residence in Barcelona, where she runs her consulting company, Global Bridge. In addition, she is the Director of Globalization and Localization for an exciting AI company here in the United States called Intento. Yuka has been in the industry for 25 years and is a leader in the LockWorld community and also is involved in leadership through her other involvements and activities. Yuka, it's a pleasure to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you very much for inviting me. This is so exciting.
Thank you. We think so too. Well, you are in a United Nations role of your own, aren't you? We're going to talk about your native Japan today in terms of Japanese customers and businesses navigating the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to address the fact that you are working primarily for a company here in California mm-hmm. that I mentioned, Intento, AI and machine learning. And then you have your own Global Bridge consultancy. But today we are going to talk about Japan. Do you want to share just some overarching views about how B2B and B2C companies are navigating in the pandemic?
Yes, in Japan, right?
Yes, please.
It's kind of the same with other countries. I think this pandemic really pushed everybody to accelerate the digitization that was going on for a while. As a consequence, globalization is a must because once you're online, you're global. There's no borders, right? So I think this is what's happening, and Japan is no exception.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. You're talking about B2C and B2B, and if I think of Japanese consumers and customers, I think they are kind of too well taken care, because if I think of the characteristics of the Japanese market, they're extremely detailed oriented. The customers and clients, consumers are looking for perfect quality in both product and services, right? So in that regard, Japanese market is very, very mature. But if I think of the back end of this, they're still operating with a very old system like papers. You don't believe it. Papers.
Wow.
And do you know Hanko? Do you know seals that they use to approve things?
Right. Why don't you explain to the audience? I know I happen to know of that, but why don't you explain to the audience? It's kind of like we have a letter stamp. Like in the old days, people would do a romantic letter. They would put a heart wax in a stamp. Why don't you explain about this stamp?
Yeah, I mean, the Japanese companies are still using this personal seal to approve the decisions. And decisions are made in consensus, meaning from the person who is proposing, it goes to the person who is going to be maybe executing, and the bosses from the middle management to the top executives. The paper, really, a piece of paper is going around in the companies with personal seals on, saying, I'm approving this, next person. I'm approving this, next person.
So none of those things have changed. I'm sorry, none of those things have changed despite the pandemic and the additional, here you have this customer. It doesn't sound like the quality level has become more flexible. Just because of the pandemic, people still expect the same quality and speed of service, and they have the whole customer satisfaction metrics that they would normally have in regular times, still applying even though these are challenging times. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yeah, I mean, these things going to be changed because of the pandemic. The Japanese people knew that this was too old to be operating in the digital world, but I think there's no motivation, or there's no incidence to push it to another level, and Japanese people love things that has already, let's say, approved or done before. If there's no success cases, people wouldn't do it. So this was going on for a long time, knowing that this wouldn't work in digital world, but this pandemic really pushing to change this Japanese custom, business habit. And I think last month in July, the government declared that they are talking to the business leaders to really change this habit, business processes, from the government side and the business side, business owners side, industrial leaders. So I think this is going to happen finally in Japan. This means now Japan is leading this customer care and customer really centered delivery, and maybe it's gonna accelerate more. This is what I'm thinking.
Thank you. That's fascinating. I feel like we have a little microscope looking right at the Japanese process and business process. So a couple of questions came up as you were talking. Thanks for those insights. One is that, for many years, Japan was held, and in many ways is still held, as sort of the quality king. The emperor of quality was always Japan. Americans for quite a long time, especially in the 80s and 90s, looked to Japan for the just-in-time methodology from some of the many other methodologies where quality was synonymous with customer service. And as you're talking about accelerating some of the business processes, many countries, as you know very well from your UN scenario these days, have found that digital transformation has accelerated. It sounds like, and I'm asking for your feedback, to go from stamping papers through a group to digital transformation is quite a leap. Do you see that happening, and how do you see that happening?
I'm pretty sure it's going to happen because now that the business leaders and the government is pushing, then people should do it, and people can do it. And you talked about startups. I think Japanese people are good at taking something into their country, not copying, but making it, doing Kaizen, doing improvement, enhancement,
right,
and implementing it. I think this is the Japanese strength. And these business processes are in foreign countries already implemented. So I think what's going to happen is the Japanese people are going to go for it and implement it and even improve it.
That sounds great. Do you see any particular track or pace of B2B versus B2C, or is there that much segmentation? It sounds kind of like a one approach fits all, but you talk about it. Is it that way? Do B2C and B2B companies work similarly? Are the customers treated similarly? How do you have a sense of that?
Yeah, I think looking at some numbers from Japan, I think it's not too much about B2C and B2B. It's the segmentation is the size of the business.
Okay.
Yeah, bigger companies and corporations are not reducing their investment into IT or digitization, but smaller companies, small companies or medium-sized companies are kind of struggling to invest more in this because of the pandemic. It's very
Right.
ironic, but the situation is not good for small and medium-sized business owners. As a consequence, they have to invest in IT and digitization, but they're thinking how. And here, I think the government should step into, but I still don't see any specific measurement from the government. But I trust that it will come because this is absolutely needed for, this small size businesses, and including, of course, startups, because startups are small and they
Of
really
course.
need governmental support, I guess.
So when you say governmental support, are you thinking of things like disaster relief funding assistance? Is that when you say the government stepping in, what did you have in mind? If you were on
Like,
the ear of the PM, what would you recommend?
like subvention for grants for digitization, not like the measures EU companies, EU countries took, like subsidizing unemployment, blah, blah, blah. I'm not talking about that, but talking about when you want to invest in digitization or in your IT system, there should be some kind of subvention grants for that, for small size businesses.
And got that. And especially since many rely on foot traffic, don't they? That isn't happening right now with shelter in place.
Yeah, I don't think it's happening much, and we have to see because this is a very new trend,
Well, also, it's not like Japan didn't have other things to deal with as well, right? I mean, it seems like Fukuyama recovery is just beginning to really launch off. And I have seen some very innovative startups. I had the privilege of some discussions with BookScan several years ago. They scanned books because they were Tokyo based and there's a concern for space in Tokyo. And so they had the idea of scanning books, which I don't know the copyright, obviously the values about copyright are a little different. And then people would get rid of the books and just have these online things. And then here they were working on photos. But it's very difficult to get people, even now with Google, Picasa, and some other things, it's very difficult to get people to part with their very treasured family photos and think about tearing them up. And but that was somebody trying digital transformation very early. I mean, this is probably five years ago now. So sometimes it's a matter of timing, isn't it? The pandemic is creating a new level playing field for timing.
And actually, the first sign of lockdown was the cancellation of World Mobile Congress here in Barcelona.
That's right. It was huge. Yes, that was
it's the world's biggest telecommunication show in the world, and it was canceled suddenly. And of course, I usually work there, and it was interesting because Japanese people didn't cancel the trip.
Oh, they didn't?
No, they came all the way from Japan to Spain, and they were spending time visiting people and companies and doing meetings in private. And I participated in some of these. And one of them was the governmental effort to create digital hub in Tokyo Bay Area. And it was very interesting because they're creating a digital content hub in Tokyo Bay Area, and they're doing world survey research, and they eyed in Catalonia here. Catalonia is the region where Barcelona is. Barcelona is the capital of Catalonia.
Yes,
because
we
of
are
the
familiar.
yeah, the Bay Area, because of the what what Barcelona is doing, they came to study, and I saw these people, and they're not stopping. I saw these people just before the lockdown, of course, because it was in March,
Right.
and they're evolving. So there's no stopping of digital transformation in Tokyo, and
No,
you're going to see a big movement, I guess, right now.
that sounds exciting. Are there any companies that you've been working with or our partners are familiar with that have made a good stride in the pandemic, have somehow made it work for them, whether it's helping workers learn how to work at home or anything like that? That would also be, I would imagine, work from home for many Japanese
Hmm.
companies. It's also quite unusual.
Yeah, and yeah, I have two of the examples. For example, the company I've been working for, a retail technology company. Of course, the retail industry is the hardest hit, one of the hardest hit industry of the pandemic, by the pandemic, right? Because they had to close down the physical stores. And of
Right.
course, if you're providing the technology to run a physical stores, what do you do? I mean, they lose the projects, but they quickly pivoted because, of course, it's a startup and it's a scale up right now. Of course, they know this pivoting strategy, so they quickly came up with the technology to control the physical stores,
Wow.
yeah, for pandemic, and they partnered with Intel. I mean, they're already technology partners, but Intel listed um, the technology they came up in a matter of weeks, like 2 or 3 weeks, as one of the 10 Intel official COVID technologies.
Wow.
So yeah, that it was amazing to watch this because they went from millions and millions of revenues projection to almost zero, and they pivoted so quickly, and they will come out from this pandemic, I think, winning. We have to see, but I have the
That's a
feeling.
nice story.
Yeah, yeah, and also Intento is taking a momentum because international businesses suddenly realized sending home people, meaning that we have to replace these business processes we are working with people, if it's possible with machine learning and machine translation and AI. So Intento is gaining momentum because of this shift in digital transformation and stay home kind of operations.
But did Intento is an American company, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're cheating, but it's okay. It's good to learn. And hopefully, actually, a lot of Japanese companies will learn about companies like Intento that can help them accelerate digital transformation. If you can master things like machine learning, which is so tricky, basically teaching machines to learn.
Mhm.
It's a little bit of a hard to understand as a concept, but teaching machines to learn can really ramp up digital transformation, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I saw some fantastic AI project in Japan, and of course they know how to do it. And what this pandemic does is just pushing this trend big
That's
time.
exciting.
Yeah.
Well, I think that we're headed into the really key question. I'm always sort of with a lived inquiry, as we talk about in leadership
Mhm.
work, about, what opportunities are possible or have emerged because of the pandemic. One of them is obviously, as we've been talking about today and this evening for you, the acceleration of digital transformation. And the other, I'm just wondering about Are there new levels of creativity or strategy, or, I have one company that comes to mind, but I'll turn it over to you. What has emerged that might not have emerged, or what is characteristically Japanese that is more visible? However you'd like to characterize it, what's the opportunity in this crisis for Japanese companies and
Well, the
customers?
Japanese companies, well, I think the Japanese companies do really well, like gaming and, gaming and related technologies of virtual reality and augmented reality. And I think these are going to bloom even more. This is what I'm thinking. For example, I heard that there's a tour operating company that they have to cancel everything. So they created virtual reality tour to gather people in a small space, small group, of course. You can't really see, you can't really get together as a big group, and and make them fly in the seat, like in a plane,
Yes.
using virtual reality, and they really recreate the the travel experience to foreign countries, like not just flying, but arriving to a place in a foreign country and doing sightseeing with virtual reality. So that kind of thing is going to happen, maybe, you know.
I loved seeing that. I thought that was, well, just to take a step back, I love how they even had the check-in desk at the airport. I think they either did it at an airport or they recreated an airport scene so that the participants actually checked in at a desk like a normal airport, and they had flight attendants serving drinks, and they looked like they were on an airplane, but then they all had the AR headsets on
Like
and the
this.
VR headsets on. It was, and it was so Japanese in a way.
I know.
It seems like, and this is an outside view, I look forward to your comment. It's either this very bureaucratic paper stamping, or else it's this at the other end of the spectrum, this Star Wars experience of high tech and glitz and all this stuff. It's an amazing what it appears to me like a dichotomy. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's exciting. And one thing I want to say about Japanese culture, it's 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 always a contrast, like
Apparently.
stamping culture, and then the virtual reality of futuristic use case. It's always contrast, and I myself, I'm Japanese, but sometimes I think about my country and I'm like, wow, what a contrast! Like Zen-like temple and futuristic towers in Tokyo. Everything is kind of contrast. So yeah.
Do you have an explanation for that, or do you see, is it like a trajectory of some kind, or are there like
Yeah.
two different groups of people that just operate kind of like silos, simultaneously, but they don't really connect?
Mm-hmm. I think I explain this because I sometimes explain how to enter the Japanese market, and I explain this contrast. And my
Truly.
explanation is because of the thousands of years of history and lots of cultures mixing, and people are used to have different things, like layered culture. American culture is very layered too,
Yes. Yes.
but if if you if you think of one person, it's not that they have a contrast within them. I don't know how to explain it. Maybe because of the religious system, because Japanese people have um, basic religion is Shintoism. This is the Japanese religion based on the Japanese mythology. we have lots of gods, like Hindus, so
Yes.
it's not like one god system religion like Christianism, Judaism, um, like Islamic. It's a little different. So people tends to tolerate more, I think, more different things. Maybe I'm wrong, but this is my explanation. Personal explanation is this, because people can tolerate more. So there's I think there's tolerance in the society to hold this kind of contrast in everything. I would say in everything, it's not just the business. I mean, like culture, like manga. How do you explain geisha and manga coexisting in a culture? It's always like contrast. It's very
Well,
interesting culture.
yeah, that's part of what makes it interesting. And we all have our incongruities, right? And America is such a hodgepodge.
Yeah.
But I just wondered though, this particular contrast, as you mentioned, is so marked.
Mm.
It makes it tempting to want to compare and contrast. So it'll be interesting to see if there are any folks still stamping documents in a year and a half. When we're further past this.
Yeah. I would like to see it, and I'm going to observe what's going to happen and what's happening.
Not to beat a dead horse, but I just wonder if there's a difference between rural areas and this kind of thinking and, more urban areas like Tokyo.
Good question. Very good question. It's like New York, New York is sometimes people say New York is not the United States because it has its dynamic. It has its energy, particular energy. Tokyo is the same. Tokyo is very particular, and and rural area is very different from Tokyo. That's for sure. And maybe there's some explanation there too. But one thing you have to think is in Tokyo, we have almost more than 10% of the population of Japan. So it's a huge city. So if Tokyo has something, it's almost pervasive in Japan because it's a huge city.
Thank you so much, Yuka. It's been so enlightening to speak with you. And of course, like everywhere in the world, we wish much recovery on a personal and business level about pandemic and everything else. And we'll continue to look to Japan for some interesting lessons and tips going forward. Wish you every success at Intento and with Global Bridge and the leadership work you do. And thank you so very much for your comments. Next month, we'll be talking with Navarro Schlegel about what it's like to sell into enterprise technology customers during the pandemic. And then in October, we'll have a really interesting guest who's going to be talking about how American companies in India are faring and what the lessons are for them. Again, I'm Lucy Newcomb with NewComm Global. We specialize in go-to-market strategies worldwide and global leadership. Thanks for joining us and look forward to seeing you next month. Bye-bye, Yuka. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.